What's up, everybody? It's Troy Cartwright. Welcome back to another episode of 10-Year Town. Before we get started, I hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. And I also just wanted to remind everybody that we are getting ready for our brand new Q&A episode coming out soon. If you have a question, you can submit that at 10yeartown.com. We appreciate you. Thanks. Today's guest is music journalist and author Josh Crutchmer. You know Josh from his work in the New York Times, his contributions to Rolling Stone, and his new book, Red Dirt Unplugged, out December 13th. In this episode, we talk about the future of music journalism, what it means to cover music in 2024, our opinions on what it should do and why it matters. We talk about some of my favorite songwriters like Tom Skinner and Stony Larue, and so much more. I found this conversation really, really fascinating, and I know you guys will too. So without further ado, here he is, Josh Crutchmer.
Well, I think it can just happen faster now because of social media. Like,
people just decide that
it's the thing.
Yeah, they just decide you're this band and that's who you are.
I feel like Wyatt Flores, same thing. It's just like it just kind of started happening, and it's already it at least feels to me like it's already huge.
The first time I saw Wyatt was only a year ago, despite being from his hometown, and you walk into a place thinking you're going to see this next up and comer, and it's true, right? You are, but my first experience with him wasn't like a tiny dive bar. He sold out Bowery Ballroom in New York.
Wow.
And then 3 weeks later, I go down to Dallas and that Bomb Factory, which is in Deep Ellum. And
yeah,
I mean, that's a big room, and that's sold out, and it's just wall to wall people in the upper decks. And like, that's somebody a year into their established career now. My brain cannot wrap my mind around it. Even fast blow ups that I'm used to were, they were works in progress. They felt like there was this order to things, that you would play here and then you would play there. And
we had a Flatlands drummer on the podcast, Jason.
Yep.
And I've known them for a really long time, and I was telling them, like, watching their career has been like playing the video game Rock Band. Like, they started out, and then they've just kind of been this slow, steady thing, and there's just a lot of variations of the path, and that's sort of a lot of what we talk about here on this podcast, is like helping people understand that everyone's path is different, right. And I don't know. I find it inspiring. I'm sure some people find it infuriating, but there's no set rule book, I
did a post. I wrote a story, let's say March, close enough, and it was about Dylan Gossett. And at the time, I think he had just put out second EP, like a 4-song EP.
Yeah.
But by then he's already signed to Big Loud, and he's got a label in New York, and hadn't even been touring a year and was selling out places. And I liked the profile, and I put him in my book, and thought it was a good story. And I posted the profile on my Instagram page, just a link to it, because every time I write about somebody, I'll put it on my socials.
Yeah.
And a very established artist from Texas was the first person to comment, and he just commented, "You're garbage. You didn't pay your dues." And I guess I understand, but if that technology had been available to the person who said this in the year 2000, they would have done that, and they would have caught on in a day and a half. And
right.
So I hid the comment.
Yeah. Hey.
Yeah.
It's your social media profile,
Exactly.
We sometimes life's too short,
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited about this, and I do an intro before, so I'll provide people with a little more context of who you are and what you do. And but I normally start this thing off with the question, how long have you been in town? Obviously, your backstory or whatever is different. You don't live in Nashville, but I was thinking, okay, well, how do I turn this on its head today? And I was just curious, like, I guess, how long have you been, I guess, like, in journalism? How many years?
So I am a 2001 graduate of Oklahoma State University, and I was working at the college newspaper there. And my actual job was I was the sports editor. I covered sports. So that's kind of where my journalism dates to.
Yeah.
But when I was living in Stillwater, Oklahoma in 2000, that was the era of a yellow house just south of campus where a bunch of musicians lived. And those musicians happened to be Cross Canadian Ragweed, Jason Boland, and the Stragglers lived there, and Stony Larue. And they were just the latest generation of waves of artists that would come play, that lived there in Stillwater and played, every night around town. And if you didn't have tastes for their styles, which was Red Dirt, you could walk down the street to a different bar, and on Tuesday night, the Flaming Lips would play for free, and Wednesday night, All American Rejects would play for free. So I kind of realized, I didn't know that I was living through lightning in a bottle, but I kind of thought it might have been something special.
Yeah.
And I wondered at the time, like, am I living through the era of what the Front Porch in College Station was? Or am I living through some sort of era that people will speak about the way they speak about Seattle in the early grunge days? I didn't know, but I took my chances that maybe I was, and decided in college that I was going to write about the artists surrounding me the way I would write if I were a veteran journalist, but I was putting them in the college newspaper. But at the time, that was their press kit. Everything I wrote just ended up there. And so that's what started it. And then I went off and had a pretty classic climb the ladder of success journalism career until present day I'm at the New York Times. And I never didn't write about music, but I did it really rarely because my job was always on the editing side of journalism. I was a graphic designer, I was a news designer, but I was also always in touch with where I was from, which was Oklahoma, and I was always in touch with the Red Dirt scene I had come from. And so every time I felt there was something to write about, I would do it. When Cross Canadian Ragweed broke up, I happened to be living in Chicago, working at the Chicago Tribune. Their final show was in Chicago, so I wrote that. I wrote obituaries for George Jones for the Nashville City paper here back when that was a thing, and one for Merle Haggard when I was living in Cleveland and working at the Plain Dealer. So if there was reasons to write, I always would, but it wasn't until 2018 when I was visiting my hometown, when I was visiting Stillwater, and somebody told me that this Red Dirt scene that I had grown up in was, in danger of being lost to history because Red Dirt means something different now. People think of it as a scene that's tied to several states. And told me one of the artists says, if you don't write about this, no one's going to know where this all came from. So I wrote a book that came out in 2020 called Red Dirt, and that sent my entire life and career into whatever the reverse of a tailspin is, because 4 years later, I'm still employed by the New York Times. My day job is planning editor there, but I have tethered myself so much to covering this part of country music, and not just that, not just country, but the larger Americana scenes and all their adjacent genres, that anything that would be considered just left to mainstream or not quite fit for the radio. It just seems that I have an understanding where all that's from, and so I can tell a lot of those stories, and combine that with the journalism training I have. I've just positioned myself really uniquely. All that is which to say, nearly everybody I write about has Nashville ties. I don't know that I've ever written about somebody that didn't have ties to here. Ragweed was signed to Universal South. All those artists I name drop had record deals or managers here. So I was really never a cynic about Nashville and music. It just happened to be that I never actually lived here, but all the people who I write about and the stories that I think are important for music fans to know are all tied to this town. So I have had to become very familiar with it and make myself very comfortable here, and I have.
Yeah. When I think you occupy such a unique space, which I want to get to, because I've been reading your books, and there's so many things in there that I have questions about. But I was thinking on the drive in today about how I think the news dropped today that Woj is retiring. And so there's this podcast that I like called The Press Box.
Yeah.
And they were talking about that, and then also how the insider has sort of replaced the columnist. And so I was thinking about that in relation to the music business. I don't really know where we get our, there's the Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
But I feel like growing up there were many, and now there are very few. And there's blogs and stuff now. But I don't know. Do you have any insight into that?
The really funny thing is there are some social media rumors going around about one of the bands that I'm very familiar with and that I have a really long history with. I think rumors that the band in question is Cross Canadian Ragweed. They just posted an update to their website for the first time in 15 years or whatever, and I'm being tagged all over social media. We're going to have a Crutchmer about this, and the reason is because when in 2021, when the Turnpike Troubadours came back, that was a story that I broke. I broke it for Rolling Stone, and I had a version of their story also in my book the year before, and so that's where we are right now. And there's as we record this, I don't know what their future holds, but that's what I'm getting tagged with.
Yeah.
And so I'm reckoning with that as we speak. And where I have landed is, I think that the role of an insider with journalism training is probably really, really, really important to this era of music that is so social media driven, that is so artists connecting with fans, and in ways that just wasn't the case 20 years ago. So when I go to write, I am trying to put artist voice first, because I think that's how fans of music are conditioned now to experience you guys. And some artists do that really well from the stage and from social media, and some of them don't. But what I have learned from being in the wings over the course of 20 years in tour buses and back lounges is, if you can get a creative person, an artist, a songwriter, to open up, and then you show them as a writer that you will do right by what they've opened up to you about, that goes a really long way. So I have reckoned with this in the books that I've written, in which I've said some of the stuff that I do can't be considered traditional journalism, because it's not 100% objective. There's some artists that I write about that I frankly want you to like. And that's not necessarily right down the middle. But the lines in the sand that I draw are things that I write have to be true. They can't be fluff pieces. And if there are moments of contention, controversy, or downtimes, then all of a sudden, then you can't run and hide from me. You have to answer those questions too. And of course, in the heat of the moment, we'll see what artists do if something like that happens. However, that does allow for a really free and open space of writing stories and books, and it allows artists' voices to be centered more than my own, and that has really, really, really worked. And it works especially in the part of the music world where there's not just nonstop media training, there's not top tier publicists. It's just artists and managers that have stories to tell and really don't know how to do it, or maybe just haven't had an experience with a journalist before. I find a lot of them feel pretty comfortable in the same room as me. And one of my favorite things when I'm talking to an artist is to leave the interview and have them like say, I never heard a question phrased that way, or that was a great conversation. That was so fun. Yeah. And if all's going well in my job in this side of the industry, that's where I land. And it results in some really good stories. It results in some really complete pictures that I don't think you get if you're just trying to be matter of fact. Here's me and you on one side and the other of a Zoom interview. So all of that is really unique. Like, you can't just walk into this business with connections or a history or an understanding, but it's not just that. I think it's compelling, and I think it's interesting. And for the most part, I think that's been the response to the work that I put out into the world.
Yeah. Well, and it's sort of actually, to me, like oddly a reflection also of kind of like where music is right now. It's all very niche.
Yes.
And Red Dirt is niche. You know, when I was in college, I would do, you know, what any, or I don't know, it seems like this is what any aspiring artist or songwriter would do. I would find songs that I liked and I would look up who wrote them. And there was this guy that whose name I would see over and over again, and it was Tom Skinner. And so when I got your book and I started reading it, I was like, because I had felt like I had devoured, and this was back in 2012.
Yeah.
I basically felt like I had found everything that I could find, which was, there just wasn't much. I knew about the history, you know, I knew how involved he was in the Oklahoma music scene, and there was a band, I think they're still a band, slightly reconfigured, the Damn Quails.
Yes.
And I knew that, so I can't remember, they were tweeting a lot about Tom Skinner. Like, I was just sort of aware of this guy, and I think it was the song, I think Cody Canada recorded Water Your Own Yard.
Water Your Own Yard.
And that's a Tom Skinner song, right?
It is indeed.
And I was just like, to me, it was the greatest song I'd ever heard. And I was like, who is this guy? And I never could find anything. So I think what you do, like you were alluding to earlier, where it's like, if you don't write down these stories, no one's ever going to know. I'm so glad to be able to have those pages to know more about this guy.
Well, this is something that you just hit on, that actually, if I could sum up what I consider my, I don't know, credo is too strong of a word, but what certainly drives me in the work that I do is this. So, Tom Skinner, a military brat, ends up in Stillwater in the mid 80s. Another aspiring musician in Stillwater in the mid 80s takes a liking to him and wants to join his band. And that kid's name's Garth Brooks. And Skinner is actually in the band that accompanies Garth from Stillwater, Oklahoma to Nashville. And Skinner doesn't stay around. Tom Skinner does not stay around. He and his brother Mike leave and they go back, and Tom eventually makes it back to central Oklahoma, where he inspires the red dirt scene that I write about, including the Great Divide and their frontman Mike McClure. And in the mid-90s, they have a record deal with Atlantic, and they have a couple of minor hits. And they're a four-piece band, and they directly inspire Cross Canadian Ragweed, who does the same for Jason Bowen and the Stragglers and Stony LaRue. And Mike McClure, who I just name-dropped, produced the now 15-year-old and just groundbreaking Turnpike Troubadours album, Diamonds and Gasoline. Mike McClure also produced the first Whiskey Myers album. And then I've name-dropped Ragweed, and they go on to have a real run at the top of Texas music. But then their management team goes on to manage Randy Rogers, and then Randy Rogers goes on to manage William Beckman and Parker McCollum, and suddenly we're talking about 2024's top tier of country music. And I've just tied it all the way back to Tom Skinner, and to bring it full circle, Skinner comes back to Stillwater, inspires the Great Divide, and they have their little moment. And during a period where they break up, their band stays around Stillwater, Oklahoma, and a couple of their members become mentors to a young, single-digit aged Wyatt Flores.
Wow.
So that is the equivalent of what? About a 40-year tightrope that we just walked, and you don't realize till the end of it you're on a tightrope. So I would describe what I do, and in my opinion, the value that I bring to people that are interested in music is I can tell you where the music you like comes from.
Yeah.
And usually what I find in that position is if somebody shows me where the music I like comes from, I'm going to find more music I like. And that is sort of what's been driving me this last decade.
Yeah. That's so fantastic.
Being able to rattle off something like that just off the top of your head.
Well, and tie it all together. It's amazing.
Stuck in, and there's no point in bearing witness to that and seeing it all happen up close if you can't share it. What's the fun in that?
Yeah, well, it's scratching an itch too, because if I can't sleep and I want to go all the way through the kings and queens of England, you know, by just seeing Preceded By, I want to be able to do that with my music too.
Yes,
you know. So I love that sort of musical family tree, and you can do that in a lot of genres, but I really don't feel like many people have done it in the red dirt, in the Texas country scene. And it's just such a rich music scene, you know? I mean, that's really what got me into music in the first place was hearing the live version of Robert Earl Keen singing Front Porch Song and saying that they were waiting for the Presbyterians, you know?
Exactly. And you know, you could do the same. You could do the same with Robert Earl. There's just so much about everything that is good about country music, about, you know, Austin rock, that is influenced by somebody at that level and with that kind of history and those kind of stories, and somebody that literally sat on the front porch of the Dixie Chicken with Lyle Lovett and played songs. And why wouldn't you want to follow all those threads?
Yeah.
And being able to do that, writing about 20-year-old kids now and realizing that somebody they cite as an influence can be traced back to Robert Earl Keen, and being able to not make that sound boring or like a Wikipedia entry when you write it, that's a challenge. But when you pull it off, man, it's really cool.
Yeah. Well, and it's when it's all there in one book too, you can just sort of like pick around and find different stuff. And another, I guess they're chapters, was the chapter on where you talked about Stony Larue.
Yeah.
And I have this was almost another life for me. 7 or 8 years ago, I probably opened like 5 or 6 shows for Stony. It might have been more. I can't remember. It felt like a lot, but I hadn't played a lot of shows at the time, so they loom large in my mind. He's so incredible. Yeah. He has such great songs, but when you see the live show, it really hits differently. And that's what I loved in what you wrote is I think you said like he's like one of the best musicians you've ever seen. I can't remember the exact wording, but
when we, and I say me and the friends that I ran around with that weren't musicians but that liked it. When we were all 21 years old and living in Stillwater, and Stony Larue would play the Wormy Dog Saloon and Eskimo Joe's multiple nights a week, and there was no cover. They were playing for tips. We would all look at each other and say, "This is the best voice we ever heard." Yeah. It was universal. Everybody would just agree. and we would point at other people. We would point at Cody Canada and Jason Mullen, and there would be things we would say about them too. But when it came to Stony, we've never heard a voice like that. And when you hear him sing, when you see him on stage, especially, if he's singing about having fun, you're having fun. If he's singing about having his heart broke, yours is shattering into a million pieces. And you get that connection when you sit on the fan side of the stage in front of someone like that. And I never forgot feelings like that. And the reason that so many of those get brought back up in the writing that I do is because I hope that your audiences pick up on that and think the same thing. I want them to.
Yeah. Do you ever find, as we're sort of talking about some of the nuance between like straight journalism and being kind of like an insider, how do you deal with like, I guess you would call it like conflict of interest? Like, I'm sure there are times you have to write something you don't want to write about somebody that you're friends with or have a trusting relationship with. I have, well, let me tell you the big picture answer first. Yeah.
Every book that I write starts out with this book's a conflict of interest. And I want you to know that before you read it. And I will always say, this is where I'm from. These people are people that I know. And at the end of the day, you have to take anything that I write about them into account.
Yeah.
So that is the big picture answer. But when I get into real day-to-day writing, stories, journalism that I'm doing, I still have to apply journalistic standards. So we'll throw a random example out. If I go to your show tonight and you put me on your guest list and I go back there and I'm back in your green room eating your little celery with the ranch dip, or if I'm, side stage and then whatever, if I've done that and something happens that is not great, I don't feel like I can go write about it. I feel like there's lines that I have to keep.
Yeah.
This happens on occasion. I will be living the non-journalist side of my life. I will be hanging in the wings. I will be taking something in, and there will be something that I feel like if I wrote about this, I would be violating about 7 different codes of ethics. And that causes 2 problems. One, you don't want to burn people that put that trust in you that will allow you into their circles. Secondly, no matter what I do right now in my career, no matter who I write about, and often Rolling Stone, or it's a book that I write, by the terms and conditions set out by the policies of the New York Times, I have to abide by the New York Times policy in everything that I do. So I just can't operate in ways that are misleading or obvious conflicts of interest. So when you see me in that situation, I am either leading with, this is a conflict of interest and you should take that into consideration,
Yeah.
or I am honestly saying, I have to set this out in this situation. And sometimes I set it out completely, and sometimes I will still advise other journalists on what I would do in their shoes. And I do try to do that because I do realize that I'm in a position that lots of journalists aren't, and there's a responsibility that comes with that. But at this point in my life, I also have a responsibility to music to not just share fun, happy-go-lucky stories. And so I always have to weigh that, all those things that I just told you, and really apply them case by case. And
Yeah.
I've done both, and probably will continue for a while.
Yeah.
I will say there has never been an instance of me actively writing about an artist with something that would be considered tough, controversial, even tabloidish in their history that I didn't at least include in a story as a matter of fact and record. I don't think I've ever dodged something from somebody's current life or past life that affects how people view them without at least including that part. And if anybody out there is listening and interested in something like that, go back and read what I've written about over the last 5 years about the Turnpike Troubadours. I think everything that I've done, and the reason that I probably have gotten the stories I have about that band have been because I've been very fair to them. And I don't think that a lot of journalists were in 2018 and 2019 to that band. But at the same time, there's never been anything that I've written about them that pretended those years didn't happen either. And they've always been really cool with it. They've been very forthright. And I think having that experience under my own belt has really helped guide me as I have written more and more, both stories and books this last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, I can't even imagine. It's, you know, it's, I guess first principles, it's like, it's essential to tell the truth more than anything else. So you can't dodge
You can't ever
the
run
truth.
from that. Yeah.
No.
But I think, you want to tell the truth, but where what I have found is that there is so much of songwriting and the larger concept of just being an artist that is so grounded in your lives and your experiences that the real actual truth is 90% of the world that is out there. So I still exist with a really broad canvas that I can paint on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really, you know, I enjoy what you do, and I'm glad that you're doing it, because it was a real, like, I can't describe this feeling. The closest I can approximate this feeling that I had when I read your book was like, I have been reading The Power Broker for like 2 years. I just finished it. And then I found out that there was a podcast about it. Like 99% Invisible is doing a whole thing.
Yeah.
I found that out like 3 months ago, and it was like the best day of my life, because it was like, oh, here's these other people that like this thing that I like. So when I got your books, I started reading them, I was like, here's this person writing about this thing that I like, and I didn't know that anyone else cared about it.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let me be the interviewer.
Sure.
From your perspective,
Yeah.
in this era where your access to your audience is instant, and I mean that for better or worse.
Yeah.
What do you see the value in media, in journalism? I mean, we're not breaking stories these days. What do you view the role of good journalism to your side of this business?
I think one of the most important things that it can do is just give context that you are not getting from social media. So I will give you an example.
Yeah.
This happened to me on this past weekend. My friend in Dallas was going to a show of this artist named McGee.
Yeah.
And he said, I think you'd like this record. So I go listen to the record. I love it. It's for me. I start listening to it. I want to learn more. I go to this artist's socials. Very little there.
Yeah.
I think he has like 6 posts. And so I can't, there's just not that much I can find out. So I keep Googling, find a New York Times article that's a profile on this artist. And it gave me so much context of their background, and sort of where they came from, where they were going. It discussed some other projects that they had been involved in. And so I think for, as speaking as an artist, the value in give someone else giving the context of your life and of what you do, like, it can go both ways. That can be for better or for worse. But I think that providing context is valuable, and maybe it's not breaking a new artist now. Yeah. But it's allowing people that are fans of an artist to sort of get a fuller picture, which I actually think makes for better fans.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if I'm a fan of music right now, and you just feel like you're being inundated with it by not just radio or the streaming sites, but social media as well. Yeah. Then I think that's probably a great way to, or for someone like me to operate, is understanding that, and understanding there's still some context that you can give to help separate this artist's story from that artist's story.
Yes, and it's giving depth. Yeah. Right? Because what you're getting from a TikTok, right? Here's the song, right? Or maybe here's something funny that I'm doing on the road, but you don't. Yeah. I don't know where that person's from. Maybe I can go to their Wikipedia page and like see what year they were born and that they're from city XYZ or whatever. But I would have never gotten. I don't know. There's just so much more information that makes someone interesting, and that helps you understand what it is that they're doing. And I also think I'll just throw out something that probably there's no artist in the last year that I've written more about than Wyatt Flores. Yeah. And to the point that I was backstage in February at Kane's Ballroom in Tulsa with his management when they decided to pull him off the road for the month, cancel an entire European tour. And this was a mental health break. Yeah. And of course he put out his own statement. And of course he was the one that shared that message with fans. And it was, I thought it was really well done on his part. But when it came time for me to turn around and write that same, what I saw for the New York Times, I saw what he saw, but I also saw how other people around him were reacting and what they were feeling. And I think Wyatt would probably agree that when that ran in the New York Times in April, that the full picture and the magnitude it painted of what he was going through, the
the pain he was feeling, and the steps he were taking to overcome it were something that I don't think you could just share in one single TikTok or an Instagram post.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I was after.
It's context.
Right.
And it's important because we actually have so much information now.
Yeah.
Well, we're lacking context pretty much everywhere. You will decide, not you,
Right.
royal you, that you hate someone because of a 5-second thing that someone else captured them saying online, and that's very well maybe warranted, but who knows? What was going on the 30 seconds before that, and then what was going on the 3 years before that, and the 30 years. It's you can never zoom all the way out, I suppose. But
I also think that one of the things that I aim for, and this is probably the most technical thing I'll say on this whole podcast.
Yeah.
But I think it all relates to not just myself, but everything you're doing with 10 Year Town too. When I write a story, I don't want to cover every single base and aspect of an artist. I want to go really, really deep, in depth, in detail on what feels in that moment like the biggest, most important parts of their lives. And then all the things that shaped that and made it the most important part of their lives. So, despite the fact that I have written 1 New York Times story, 3 Rolling Stone pieces, a chapter in a book, and then another chapter in the same book about Wyatt, there are parts of his life that I just haven't even mentioned that will definitely appear in his bio. And I think that's okay too. I don't think you have to cover every single part of somebody's life, even the part of their lives that make them, who they are, to tell a good story. And what I have really, really, really focused my writing with Wyatt on are the struggles that he went through, but also everything that went into those struggles, and equally important, what his time away, the counseling he sought, the value that going home to Oklahoma during his break lent to himself as a person and as an artist. I have found that I don't think I could ever stop writing just about that. And I think that's where I try to land as a writer. And I think the worst stories that I write are ones that just try to cover somebody's entire life story. And I just really tried to get away from that. And whenever I hear an editor tell me, this piece you wrote had such a focus on one thing, and it was just so crystal clear, that's the compliment that I'm looking at on the very, very, very technical journalism side of this world.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I need to tell everything about you guys, but I feel like there's one or two things that's super important that makes you who you are. And I just don't think those in any moment in time can be explored enough. They just make for super interesting, insightful, and dynamic stories that I think fans of this music relate to.
Yes.
Or at least can understand.
Yes, and you think about how I can put it in the context of writing a song.
Yeah.
A song can actually take on a completely different life of its own depending on who's singing it.
Yeah.
Whether they wrote it or not, because whatever you know about them
Right.
is starting to, like, the balloon is popped over the lyric and it's dripping all over the page, and it's just it's very interesting. So that's such a fascinating I don't know.
Look at how fans or listeners of the song Cover Me Up changed the meaning in that song depending on
Great example.
the time in Jason Isbell's life that they experienced it, or where they were at politically when Morgan Wallen covered it, or where they were when they saw this video or that video. That song has like 19 different meanings, and everyone knows the context of of how it was written. But today, that song means so much to people on multiple political spectrums,
No doubt.
multiple different views on Isbell's own life have been created by people experiencing that song at a different time in the last 12 or 13 years. I think that's fascinating.
It is. And I mean, I think that's what great art does. You know, you can go look at a Rothko painting and it'll mean something to you depending on, you know, what day it is or who's looking at it.
Yes.
So,
and I don't know what song it would be, but that would be, we'll use something that's got a lot more history. Take an obvious one like "Born in the USA," and what did that song mean in 1977, 87, 97? That actually would be a great story.
it would.
10 years apart, what did this song mean? The lyrics haven't changed.
Wow. Man, that gets me excited. Yeah. Well, I got one last question for you before we get out of here.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time, or if you were to speak to someone that's interested in writing about whatever it is that they're into, be it music or whatever's going on in their life right now, what kind of advice would you give for someone who like wants to get started, that wants to kind of do what you do, but they're 15, 20 years earlier in their journey?
Right. Please get a pencil, paper, a typewriter, a computer, a tablet, whatever your favorite means of writing your thoughts, your words, your experiences down on. Do it and read it to yourself and keep doing it. And when you're comfortable with that, share it. That is where your confidence comes from as a writer. Everything else ultimately is by chance, it's technical, it's training. You have to be in the right place at the right time to tell some of the stories. But once you start writing and get really good at it, you are going to find a way to share it. And that's what I have done. And if you're somebody that's shy about that, you don't have to share it with anybody but yourself for a while. But keep doing it and reading your own words, and don't be afraid to be critical of those and try and improve upon them. And at some point you're going to want to share it with somebody. And that's when it gets really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
When I was not to reveal too much about myself, when I was from 6th grade until I stopped it in 10th grade, because at that time it got a little embarrassing. Every single day in my school, junior high and high school, every single day, I put out my own newspaper and wrote it down with a pen and a piece of notebook paper, and I just passed it around to my classmates every single day. And that's...
What'd you write in there?
Sometimes it was anything. So sometimes it was just complete, utter gibberish. And sometimes it was reviews of the junior high football game last night. And then I would draw little stick figures that were recreating plays. And sometimes I would make ads, and the ads were like usually highly inappropriate. The ads would usually be for some product that would that would be like 3 panels. And the first panel would be like, if you used the wrong version of this product, you ended up dead. And if you used my product that I was selling, you would probably end up doing something that a seventh grader would see as the coolest thing you could do, which, if you read my seventh grade newspaper and you bought the products I was advertising, you ended up having sex. That's what it was.
It's very powerful advertising.
Yeah. But like, that was me in like age 12 and 13. And, I think that's over the top, but I think, it's really easy for me to look back and say, where the hell else was I ever going to go?
Yeah.
I tried to go to law school for 2 years, and about halfway through, a semester and a half into 3 years of law school, I just went, what am I doing? And
Not for me.
And I left and I took a journalism job.
Wow.
Yeah. It was one of those things that sometimes that path has been there so long that you don't really have a choice. And it's just, for me, that's where it was. But, that's not the case for everybody. And the way that you find out if that's for you is to just do it, even if it's just for yourself. That's
amazing advice. And, such a charming story. Sort of actually explains so much about you.
Yeah.
And your various jobs that you have just from your junior high newspaper.
This is going to send out, the listeners of this are going to be sent out on a quest to find my childhood friends and their copies of the underground.
Yes, do you think there are copies in existence somewhere? There are.
First of all, I stopped numbering them at 700, but I'd say of those 700, about 650 are in a box in my parents' house. The other 50 are out there somewhere. Get your hands on them. Have fun.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Troy,
I really appreciate it. And that's it. That's the pod. See you later. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening. If you want to submit a question for one of our Q&A episodes, you can do so at tenuretowne.com. We would love it if you would join the Tenuretown community, which just means we'll send you updates via email about stuff we got going on. And of course, please rate and review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Wherever you listen or watch this thing, we appreciate you so much. See you next week.